30 years ago, nobody talked about trigger warnings or microaggressions. What's happened in the last decade, in your mind, that has contributed to those things coming to the fore in the way that they have?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of this started with, I actually haven't studied the history of it myself, so I'm relying on my own kind of recollection having lived through it. A lot of these are outgrowths of movements that originally were completely legitimate. Namely, like when I was a child, even a teenager, it was perfectly acceptable to tell ethnic jokes. You could hear them on the radio. Polish jokes, for example. And before my time, but I guess when I was a child, African Americans were excluded from campuses. Women were the butt of sexual insults and jokes when they did set foot on a campus like MIT. And there was a legitimate movement to remove these kinds of crude barriers to full participation of stigmatized groups. Gay people as well, where there were, those of us who are above the age of 50 can remember, limp wrist jokes and, lisping imitations of gay people and so on. And so there was some increase in decency that made those kinds of demeaning remarks and discriminatory policies no longer acceptable. But often movements kind of reach their decadent phase, where they, having achieved the majority of their goals, having picked the low-hanging fruit, they don't go out of business, but they need to find increasingly obscure grievances and causes to retain their moral franchise. And I suspect that's what happened to what we now call political correctness, many aspects of which, in their original moderate form, were completely reasonable. I talk about this a little bit in The Better Angels of Our Nature, in talking about the various rights revolutions that began with the Civil Rights Revolution in the late 50s. That time after time you see what starts out as an understandable and defensible and desirable moral movement just go completely overboard, having achieved its major goals. So another example, which doesn't involve political correctness, but involves another kind of madness, is our treatment of children. So children, those of us who've read Oliver Twist and so on know how children used to be treated in the 19th century. They were, they were put to work as coal miners and chimney sweeps and starved in orphanages and so on. Then there was a kind of a children's rights revolution, where children were treated, in the words of one economist, as economically worthless, emotionally priceless. So that's our new understanding of children, as opposed to economic resources to be, exploited. And that led to a lot of great reforms: child labor laws, compulsory education, and child welfare agencies. It led to a reduction of corporal punishment of children, of spanking. Led to a greater attention to children's safety, like car seats, and not exposing kids to secondhand smoke, and playground equipment that led to fractured skulls. But now we've gotten to the point, as any parent knows, in fact, as any grown-up child knows, where parents won't let children out of their sight, where kids can't walk to school, where they can't play by themselves in the playground out of fear that they might fall or get insulted or get abducted by sex perverts. All of it totally out of proportion to any assessment of the objective risks. But the hyper-parenting movement is an example of a progressive trend that just went too far. And I suspect that a lot of this stifling political correctness comes from genuine liberation movements and rights movements that also went too far.